Who's sweeter? The man who was already in that lifestyle before he went to prison and wasn't looking for this to happen to him, right? Or the men who do things like this and will still say, oh, I ain't sweet, because I take it, I don't get took.
Really the hottest nigga, you gon' respect this lava. I'm shooting it if I pull it, boy, make sure you want this drama. I bring it to you like it's Law and Order SVU. Turn you to a vegetable, now you look good inside a soup. Family come from Bishopville, but I grew up in that Bronx Zoo, where they shoot you dead in the street and then dance all on top of you. And I do what I gotta do.
Started. Please don't get me started. Started.
What up, y'all? State Almighty, a.k.a. the Global Dark Skin Ambassador. Once again, I said I'm starting something new that I don't see no one else do that's in this lane of YouTube work that I do. And that's me reviewing and reacting to prison stories from all around the world. So right here, I got a channel that I kept coming across called Texas Prison Stories. And this is about a prison girlfriend named Coco, right? Who was, just a girlfriend. Go ahead, subscribe to Texas Prison Stories if you haven't already. Like I said, this is just me getting to understand what's going on in these other prisons across the country and all around the world. This is not to do any hating. This is not to, like I said, be a hater. Texas Prison Stories. If you decide that you want to look through my videos and do the same thing, feel free to do so. That's better than putting a copyright claim or having YouTube strike against me. But without further ado, here we go.
This is Roger Johnson's entire lawsuit. Listener discretion is advised. It's difficult to listen to.
It's difficult to listen to. Meaning there's going to be a whole lot of, hey, yo, moments. So if you hear me say, hey, yo, a few times, you know why I'm saying, hey, yo. All right, so let's keep going.
With no history of violence and very little prison experience, came into the custody of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice early January 2000. He was sent to diagnostic unit at Gurney and then to Huntsville for processing and classification. Mr. Johnson informed prison officials at both institutions that he was gay. Prison officials in Huntsville appropriately housed him in safekeeping. A state classification unit member assured him he would remain in safekeeping throughout his sentence. At All-Red Unit, a unit classification committee, also known as UCC, consisting of 3 or more officials, makes decisions on whether inmates require safekeeping at their prison. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice defines safekeeping in its Safe Prisons program as a status that permits the unit/facility to house vulnerable individuals and other potential victims together, separate from more aggressive offenders.
PC. He's talking about PC, y'all. Protective custody. That's what he's talking about.
Safekeeping status is reserved for those offenders who require separate housing in the general population because of substantiated threats to their safety due to a potential for victimization, i.e. enemies in the general population, a history of homosexual behavior, or other similar reasons.
Things like that, predators.
Mr. Johnson met and meets the criteria for placement in safekeeping status. Defendants have known for years of the pervasive and substantial risk of sexual assault at All-Red. They were also aware that Mr. Johnson was vulnerable to sexual victimization. Nevertheless, they failed to take reasonable measures to prevent him from being victimized. In September 2000, when Mr. Johnson arrived at All-Red, a unit classification committee that included Major and other officials promptly explained to Mr. Johnson that we don't protect punks on this farm. At the initial classification hearing at All-Red, the defendants placed Mr. Johnson in the general population on 8 building. Predatory inmates take Mr. Johnson almost immediately.
Damn.
These inmates gave Mr. Johnson the name Coco.
Look at that. Look at that. They got on him. Soon as they realized soon as they realized that, you know, he wasn't a straight man, they got on him. Even more hype to get on him immediately. And when I talk about prison, right, and I make videos talking about how dudes who repeatedly go to prison are likely people who like sleeping with men, and dudes who do extended bouts, extended stretches in prison, they're likely people who like to sleep with men and sleep with men often. He walked up in there like fresh piece of meat, and you know what they did? They penetrated. You know what I mean? So this is why I look at dudes funny who they repeatedly go to prison and do long stretches of time, right? And then they come home acting like they the biggest, baddest, toughest people in the world. I be like, it's no way you was in the max and you didn't sleep with a man. Like, you know what I'm saying? You're a mook man. Feel me? But let's keep going.
Thereby designating him as an inmate available for sexual exploitation. The defendants also adopted a name addressing Mr. Johnson only as Coco and referring to him as she or her. Prison gang members and the general population.
Now here's the question, right? They jumped on him. They took his booty, right? They named him Coco. And they only referred to him as she or her, right? So the question is this. Who's sweeter? The man who was already in that lifestyle before he went to prison and wasn't looking for this to happen to him, right? Or the men who do things like this and will still say, oh, I ain't sweet. I ain't a mook. Because I take it, I don't get took. But they willingly treat this man like a battered wife, right? Who's sweeter? That's the question you need to ask yourself.
And soon asserted ownership of Mr. Johnson. The gangster Disciple gang was first to officially own him. In early 2000, a gangster disciple named Andrew Hernandez forced Mr. Johnson into a cell and raped him. Afterwards, other gang members congratulated Hernandez for his conquest of Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson informed Sergeant Willingham and Assistant Warden Mooneyham that he had been raped and that he feared for his life. He asked for medical attention. They refused, stating that immediate medical care was available only in cases of emergency. On information and belief.
How is that not an emergency? His booty got forcibly taken away from him. When is that not an emergency? Outside of prison, that's an emergency. They did this man foul.
Willingham and Mooneyham did not even investigate the report at all.
Of course they
After
did.
Mr. Johnson reported the rape to them, he would continue to be raped and sexually abused every day until mid-November 2000. Hernandez also forced Mr. Johnson.
Hold on, we gotta pause this real quick. I guess we gotta let it run.
To clean his cell, make his bed, and cook his food. Hernandez told Mr. Johnson that if he did not submit, Hernandez would have killed him. In mid-November 2000, Hernandez began sharing Mr. Johnson with his friends and forcing Mr. Johnson to perform sex acts on them. During this time, gang members badly...
You know what that means. He was making, and we talking about the GDs, they was wilding. He shared his girlfriend with his other GD homies and was telling them like, yo, give my boy the neck right now. They probably running trains, all that. Foul. And them same come home and act super duper duper tough. You not a gangster. You was taking booty. You're an alternative lifestyle man. You are a Skittles man.
beat another sex slave they called Buttons for refusing to submit forced sex. Hernandez made it clear to Mr. Johnson that the same would happen to him if he resisted his role as a sex slave. In December 2000, Hernandez stole Mr. Johnson's radio, fan, shoes, and $30 in commissary from his cell. Mr. Johnson reported this theft to Willingham and Officer Lott, who laughed and insinuated that he should go get it back himself. When Mr. Johnson asked Hernandez to return the property, Hernandez assaulted him, bruising his face. Mr. Johnson was treated in the medical department and placed in segregation in 11 building for 9 days alongside his attacker. As a result of this attack, Willingham signed off on a life in danger claim, requesting safekeeping for Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson then appeared before the UCC committee to explain his needs for safekeeping. The UCC committee actually consisted of Mooneyham himself, Vitolo, and John Doe number 1. Vitolo noted that the recent attack and pointed out that given Mr. Johnson's characteristics, he should have been placed in safekeeping a long time ago. Mooneyham replied that initial classification mistakes are not their problem right now. Ignoring the obvious risk of serious harm, the UCC and Mr. Mooneyham denied the request for safekeeping and sent Mr. Johnson back to...
Why would they do that? Why would you deny him going into PC and the safekeeping when he's clearly been assaulted multiple times, robbed multiple times, forcibly having to do acts that he does not want to do with people who are abusing him? How is he like... I feel sorry for what this man had to go through, for real.
General population. Excuse me, y'all. Before being moved back to Building 8 by the UCC, Mr. Johnson received a letter from Marty Smith, a
Then
member
they
of the
moved
Bloods
him
gang,
back to where he
indicating
was
that
at.
Smith had bought Mr. Johnson from the GDs and would be waiting for Johnson to return to 8 Building. He now belonged to him. After 9 days in Building 11, prison officials then returned Mr. Johnson back to 8 Building with Marty Smith. As soon as Mooneyham, Vitolo, and John Doe returned Mr. Johnson to 8 Building, Marty Smith began treating Mr. Johnson as a sex slave. At first, only...
So he's abused for a minute by the GDs, goes to heal up after being assaulted, and then gets bought by someone else from the GDs. And they send him right back to where he was, to that person. That's crazy.
Smith, Mr. Johnson. Soon, however, Smith began forcibly selling Johnson to other inmates. In 2001, desperate for help, Mr. Johnson wrote the first of several letters to Defendant Wright, the director of classification, explaining that other inmates were sexually attacking him and asking for safekeeping, please. Of course, Defendant Wright ignored the letters. In mid-January 2001, 3 inmates in the Crip gang assaulted Mr. Johnson in the back stairwell of Building 8. They called him a renegade for not obeying their orders. Mr. Johnson reported the attack to Sergeant Matthews. Sergeant Matthews refused to report the attack and took no other steps to investigate the complaint or protect Mr. Johnson from further injury. Mr. Johnson also sought help from the R-Red Unit Security Threat Group. The STG investigates gang problems on the unit. Mr. Johnson notified Sergeant Stiegel and Officer Canedo of the STG group about his problems with the gangs and the sexual attacks he was forced to endure. They took zero action. On February 1, 2001, Mr. Johnson again wrote Wright requesting safekeeping, pleading for protection.
That was like 4 or 5
He was ignored.
times, bro.
Mr. Johnson appeared before the UCC again in mid-February 2001. They told him you need to get down there and fight or get you a man. That was their response.
fight. So they telling him, we're not gonna protect you. Fight. Possibly take another inmate's life. Or get you a man who's gonna protect you from the other men and not gonna sell you like the GDs did and the Crips did, right? That's preposterous. You see how prison is really purposely designed for you to suffer. They don't care about you being safe. Like what he's going through over here, I feel like in New York, he wouldn't even went through all of this. I don't know what's going on in Texas, man. I don't know, man.
It's that time. The UCC then denied Mr. Johnson safekeeping again, saying that they would move him from L-Pod to J-Pod in Building 8. Mr. Johnson begged them to reconsider because nearly moving him to a different housing pod in GP would provide no protection from the gangs. Defendant Bowman responded they would tie him up and drag him back to the cell if he refused to return back to Building 8. A few weeks later, Mr. Johnson again wrote Wright telling her about the forced sex acts and requesting safekeeping yet again. At this time, members of the Bloods, the Crips, and the Mexican Mafia were all sexually assaulting Mr. Johnson. Another UCC was...
Bruh. The Bloods, the Crips, the GDs, and the Mexican Mafia. This is 4 different gangs. And multiple people from every single gang. Do you understand that he is being violated by at least 10 or more people so far and pleading for his life? I'm a person who who hates bullies, and I feel the pain of people who have to be bullied, man. Like, this man didn't deserve this, no matter who he is, especially for the type of crime that he was locked up for. He didn't deserve this, man. He didn't deserve this, yo. Regardless of how he lived his lifestyle before he went to prison, man. This is crazy, bro.
Convened consisting of defendants Ward, Wathan, Vitello, and John Doe 2. During this hearing, Wathan said that he did not believe Mr. Johnson because the Crips are a black gang, and a black gang would not allow a Mexican to enslave a black American. He told Mr. Johnson, you need to start fighting. Mr. Johnson asked if he was required to fight to save himself. Wathan replied, I don't care if you fight as long as you don't use a weapon. There's no reason why black punks can't fight and survive in GP if they don't want to F-U-C-K. They again denied him safekeeping. In late February 2001, Mr. Johnson went before the UCC again. They actually gave him a minimum custody status and moved him to Building 7. Gang activity was even more rampant in Building 7. Inmates who were young, handicapped, homosexual, or perceived weak were quickly preyed upon by gang members. On information and belief, defendants were all...
Yo, man, Texas prisons, yo. Texas prisons, yo. Y'all got a lot of... y'all got a lot of Mook McMookerson type activity going on over there, man. Like, I ain't gonna lie, man. Y'all got a lot of that going on. Like, a lot of that going on, man. Like, y'all wildin', bro.
All aware of this situation. It was nothing new. Marty Smith, the Blood who claimed ownership on him, who was transferred to Building 7 with him shortly afterwards, immediately reasserted his ownership, forcibly hiring him out to other gang members as a sex slave. A week later, he filed a Step 1 grievance requesting safekeeping again. He received no reply. March 15th, Mr. Johnson received an anonymous letter from another inmate telling him that he would be dead once the unit was off lockdown because he was a snitch. One day later, he went before UCC with his fourth life endangerment hearing. The committee was composed of Wathan, Kuyava, and John Doe 3. Wathan told Mr. Johnson that Mr. Johnson needed to fight his attackers again. Kuyava said, "Bring bruises or stay out my face, man." On March 8th, he filed another Step 1 grievance describing a sexual assault and harassment. Nothing happened. April 17th, he filed a Step 2 grievance. Nothing happened. March 4th, Mr. Johnson received a reply back finally from the Step 2. Nothing happened. Throughout this period, Mr. Johnson was routinely forced to endure sexual assault and rape by multiple gang members. He became increasingly hopeless and suicidal. At the end of July 2001, Mr. Johnson went before the UCC for another procedural reclassification. He was assigned a job as a unit supply clerk and moved to dormitory in Building 18. Gang member Marty Smith, taking advantage of lax security at outrage, frequently left his own building and came to Building 18 to harass, threaten, and assault Mr. Johnson. Late July, Mr. Johnson again reported the threats and assault to Sergeant Matthews. Sergeant Matthews did file a life endangerment claim. August 2001, Mr. Johnson appeared before the UCC again on his fifth life endangerment claim. The UCC on this occasion was composed of Wathan, John Doe 4 and 5. Defendant Wathan told Johnson that Building 18 was entirely safe. On information and belief, they knew that was untrue. Again, they denied him safekeeping. Soon after, Mr. Johnson was transferred to Building 18.
This is a lot, yo. This is a lot, man. All Texas officers in this, whatever jail this is, y'all deserve all the bad karma that you come across in your life for what y'all allowed this man to go through. Whether he lived an alternative lifestyle or not, he's still a brother. That's all I gotta say about it.